Hello everyone, welcome back to Coach Craig's Sports. Today we're going to be going over some waiver wire pickups for the week. Guys that you could or should be targeting depending on your league, depending on your needs of your team. I'm going to be going over quite a few guys at pretty much every position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and DST. So I got a little slideshow here. I'm going to get started with that. I'll go over all the points, but I just want to have it all up so you guys can see it a little bit better. So first off, I'm going to start with the quarterbacks. These are in no particular order of who I would go after. Most of these guys are just guys that I would stream if I'm using a streaming approach because they have a good matchup. So the first one is Jimmy Garopollo. So last week he was 19 out of 33, 259 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. He also ran for 9 yards. ESPN scoring, he got 23.26 fantasy points. He is currently owned in 41% of ESPN leagues and 52% of Yahoo leagues. He should be available in a lot of leagues this week. He's going up against the New York Jets defense that was just torched by Josh Allen. I know 49ers don't have the greatest receiving options right now, but he is somebody to consider, especially if the Jets are able to stuff the run game like they did against the Bills. Next one's Ryan Tannehill. Ryan Tannehill obviously played last night against the Broncos. He had a pretty good game against the Broncos. The Broncos did contain the run quite a bit, though. 29 out of 43, 259 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, 14 rushing yards. He had 23.36 fantasy points. He's only owned in about a third of ESPN leagues and 45% of Yahoo leagues, so there's a good chance he's out there in your league. He's somebody that he doesn't necessarily have to be just a streamer. If you got another quarterback you kind of like, you could kind of rotate him back and forth with him, just depending on the matchup. He does offer some rushing upside generally. I know he only had 14 rushing yards last night, but it is a little bit of a solid floor compared to some other quarterbacks. He is going against Jacksonville this weekend. I know Jacksonville did all right against Philip Rivers, but they did give up 243 passing yards to him. Tannehill's probably a little bit better. And with A.J. Brown, Corey Davis, Jonnu Smith, there's definitely an opportunity to get some points as well there. Next one I got was Philip Rivers, who we just kind of talked about a little bit. He had a rough game kind of against Jacksonville. He threw the ball pretty well, minus the interceptions. He was 36 out of 43 for 243 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, and he added in 3 rushing yards, which don't expect that from him very often, as he can't run at all. He had 16.82 fantasy points. He's owned in about 20% of ESPN leagues and 27% of Yahoo leagues, so he's pretty much available everywhere. He's got a good matchup this weekend against the Vikings. You obviously see what Aaron Rodgers did against the Vikings. Devontae Adams had a crazy game, so maybe you're looking at starting Philip Rivers. Maybe you can stack him with another guy that's later on this list that we'll be talking about. If you're playing DFS, that could be a good stack too. For stacking Philip Rivers, maybe T.Y. Hilton, Parris Campbell, Jack Doyle, maybe even. We'll just have to see how that turns out. And it also depends on how well they are able to run the ball against the Vikings as well, especially with Marlon Mack being gone for the year now. Next one was Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew he didn't have crazy yardage total, but he had a very efficient day. He was 19 out of 20, 173 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 19 rushing yards. He's another guy that gets you a little bit of rushing yards, 2 or 3 points a week. He had 26.82 fantasy points this week. He's owned in about 15% of ESPN leagues and 26% of Yahoo leagues. So there's a good chance he's available in your league. This week he does go up against Tennessee's defense. I know people have been kind of talking up Tennessee's defense, especially now that they added Clowney. They have an average defense. Dory Jackson's out for a while now. They didn't look great against Drew Lock last night even, so it's something to consider there as well. The offensive line for Jacksonville actually blocked surprisingly better than I thought it would for Gardner this past weekend, so that could be something to keep an eye out for as well. And Gardner Minshew, kind of like I talked with Tannehill, he might be one of these guys. He's got a decent schedule that you could probably plug him in and play him a lot of weeks. Then the last one is, you all know him, you all love him, you all hate him. Mitchell Trubisky. He was actually one of the top fantasy quarterbacks this past weekend against the Lions. If you actually watched that game, he was pretty awful in the beginning of the game. Then the Lions kind of bailed him out at the end of the game, playing kind of like prevent defense and just blowing the lead. But he was 20 out of 36, 242 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. He also adds a little bit on the ground with 26 rushing yards. But like I said, he had just over 30 fantasy points. He's only owned in about 3% of ESPN leagues and 4% of Yahoo leagues. He's going up against the New York Giants defense, and their secondary is not very good at all. Could be a good game for Trubisky. Could be a good game for Allen Robinson and Anthony Miller as well. Could be another interesting DFS stack. We'll see how much his price goes up this week. I know he was pretty much the lowest quarterback on DraftKings last week. That's all we got for the quarterbacks. So now I'm going to go into the running backs. These, like I said, these ones are no particular order, but the running backs are going to be hopping this week, especially. There's a couple good guys to pick up, depending on your league. So we got Nyheim Hines is the first one, Colts running back. He had a pretty solid game this past weekend. He played in 53% of the snaps, which was the most out of any Colts running back. Marlon Mack is out for the year now with an Achilles injury. He had 7 carries for 28 yards and 1 touchdown. Then he also had 8 targets. He caught all of them for 45 yards and 1 touchdown as well. Ended up with 27.3 fantasy points in PPR scoring. Going forward, all my scoring here is going to be for PPR. So if you're in a standard league or a half point, just adjust that accordingly. He's owned in about 37% of ESPN leagues and 21% of Yahoo leagues, so there's a good chance he's out there. He's somebody that's going to be on a lot of people's radars now, especially with Marlon Mack being out. Jonathan Taylor's going to get the early down work, but Nyheim Hines is going to be that pass-catching back that Phillip Rivers loves to throw to the running back. He could be this year's version of Austin Eckler. He might not have quite as many catches, and he won't run the ball as much, but he's like a discount version of Austin Eckler from last year, essentially. If you need a running back in PPR scoring or a solid flex play, he's somebody you should definitely target. He's probably going to eat up a decent bit of your fab budget, depending on your league, how competitive your league is, but he could definitely be worth it. Then next one was James Robinson. He's the undrafted free agent running back for the Jacksonville Jaguars. They did cut Leonard Fournette. If you haven't seen already, a couple weeks ago that happened. I made a video about that, about Leonard Fournette, how it kind of impacts everything. And James Robinson was the guy that benefited the most in week 1 at least. He played on 68% of the snaps, so a good amount of snaps, especially for a starting running back. He had 16 carries for 62 yards. He had 1 target, 1 reception for 28 yards. He ended up with 10 total fantasy points. He's owned in 29% of ESPN leagues and 56% of Yahoo leagues. So Yahoo jumped on him pretty quick before the first week's game. Definitely somebody to check out. I don't know how many carries he's going to get going forward. Just depends on the game script for Jacksonville. But he did show some promise. I watched his tape out of Illinois State. I wasn't too impressed there. He wasn't real explosive, but in the NFL, he looked pretty good. He definitely does not have that explosiveness though. And Chris Thompson's going to get most of the passing game work when it does happen. But he's definitely a guy to probably stash on your bench. You can use him in favorable matchups, but he's not like an every week starter, so I won't go blowing your fab budget on him either. Next one's Joshua Kelley, one of my personal favorites. If you guys have been watching me for a while, I was picking up this guy late round every mock draft. I've tried to pick him up in every single league I've been in. Rookie out of UCLA. He's with the Chargers now. He only played in 24% of the snaps, but on the 24% of snaps, he ended up with 12 carries for 60 yards, 1 touchdown, and 12 fantasy points. So he's a guy, like I've been saying, he can work into that Melvin Gordon role where he gets a good amount of touches and gets the goal line work. He looked really good when he was running the ball. If you guys get a chance to go back and watch that game, take a look. He looked pretty good. He's owned in about 11% of ESPN leagues, 13% of Yahoo leagues, so there's a great chance he's available. He's one of my favorite pickups for this week, and I think he definitely has a solid role going forward as well. Next one I got is Adrian Peterson. He was kind of an odd one this week. He went to the Lions. He hasn't been there very long. He wasn't too familiar with the offense, so we didn't know how much he was actually going to play. But when he did play, he got 14 carries for 93 yards. Very good. He got 3 targets, 3 receptions for 21 yards as well. That is very good. So for PPR, he ended up with 14.4 fantasy points. He's only owned in about 21% of ESPN leagues, 46% of Yahoo leagues. So there's a good chance he's out there. He's somebody I would not blow my fab budget on. I think he'll have a good couple weeks, but as DeAndre Swift kind of gets into things, he'll see a little bit cut in his playing time. That, like I said, the odd thing was he got 17 total touches, but he only played on 31% of the snaps, so 24 plays. So when he was in there, he got the ball a lot, but he was only in there like a third of the time, so that's a little bit concerning for me. With Adrian Peterson, the other thing too is he plays the Packers this week, and the Packers do not have a very good run defense. So as long as the game's close, he could see a lot of touches and have decent production. Next one up is Benny Snell. He came in the last night's game. He replaced James Conner after James Conner rolled his ankle. He had 19 carries for 113 yards, so he was very efficient. Then Jalen Samuels saw the passing down work, so Benny Snell's not a guy he's not somebody you really want like in PPR or half-point PPR unless you really just need a running back, because he's not really going to get any catches. But in like a standard format, he'd be really good there as well. 11.3 fantasy points, owned in about 15% of ESPN leagues and 18% of Yahoo leagues, so there's a good chance that he's out there for you guys. Depending on how much time James Conner misses, he could be a solid pickup. He's definitely worth throwing 8 fab bucks on, probably, just depending on how much you have to start with. Like I said, James Conner is injured now. He gets hurt all the time, so Benny Snell's a guy you might want to keep on your bench all year. If you had James Conner, he's definitely somebody you want to pick up. If you don't have James Conner, he still might even be somebody that you want to pick up as well. He also plays against Denver, so I wouldn't expect too much for him this week. Denver contained Derrick Henry pretty good as well last night. Then we got Malcolm Brown, my favorite Malcolm Brown, Sean McVay's best friend. He played on 60% of the snaps for the Rams on Sunday night. He had 18 carries for 79 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had 4 targets. He caught 3 of them for 31 yards. So overall, he ended with 26 fantasy points. Really great week, honestly. He looked really good at running the ball. They got Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson there. Henderson's been hampered by that hamstring injury. I think he only played like 7% of the snaps. Akers got in there about 33% of the snaps, but Akers did not look good. I know I've been a Akers hater for as long as my channel's been going pretty much, but Brown's definitely in the back to have here, especially early on in the season. He's only owned in about 8% of ESPN leagues, 28% of Yahoo leagues, so there's a good chance he's out there. He's a guy that you probably want to spend 15-20% of your fab budget on. He's also going against Philadelphia this week. Philadelphia also did limit Washington running backs pretty well. So he might not have the biggest week this week, but we'll just have to see how that plays out. Then last but not least for the running backs is Myles Gaskin. Nobody owns this guy right now. He's available in pretty much every league in ESPN and Yahoo. He had 10.6 fantasy points. He had 9 carries for 40 yards, 4 targets, 4 receptions, and 26 yards. He played on 63% of the snaps, which is pretty crazy when you think about it, considering they brought in both Jordan Howard and Matt Breida. I remember reading that Jordan Howard was kind of banged up, so that might have gave Gaskin a little bit more run. But Breida did not look good when he was in the game. And I think Breida's just kind of a product of the 49ers system than actually a good running back. Gaskin's somebody that I did like coming out of college, out of Washington. He did look pretty good last year in the preseason. So he's definitely a guy, if you're in a deeper league, to go grab. If you want somebody to stash on your bench and see what he does the next couple weeks, do that as well. But he's not somebody you're going to pick up and start right away unless you're really desperate. Then we're going over the wide receivers. First one we got up is Parris Campbell. This is who I was talking about earlier of Phillip Rivers. He looked very, very good this week. He played on 82% of the snaps. He had 1 carry for 9 yards on a little end around. Looked pretty good there as well. 9 targets for 6 receptions and 71 yards. He ended with 14 fantasy points for PPR scoring. He's only owned in about 30% of ESPN leagues and 23% of Yahoo leagues. This was very, very low. He's somebody that I did like a lot going into this season. He definitely could be that second-year breakout wide receiver, much like DJ Chark last year. And so far, he seems to be Phillip Rivers' favorite target. Going against the Vikings this weekend, he could have a monster game. So he's definitely worth throwing a handful of fab bucks at, and you could probably even play him as soon as this week. Next one we got up is Laviska Shenault. He played 62% of the snaps this past weekend for Jacksonville. He had 2 carries for 10 yards. This is something I do like about his game, that you can put him in the backfield and he'll get a couple carries a game as well. Don't expect too much there, but it's just a nice little padded stat. He had 4 targets for 3 receptions, 37 yards, 1 touchdown. He had 13.7 fantasy points. He's owned in about 8% of ESPN leagues and 12% of Yahoo leagues. So there's a good chance he's out there. He's somebody I'm not really looking to start right away, but he's definitely worth picking up. Put on the end of your bench and just seeing what he does like next couple of weeks. Another thing to watch out for is D.D. Westbrook was inactive this weekend. So if Westbrook comes back and they play him, it'll be interesting to see what Shenault's snap count looks like if Westbrook's on the field as well. And that moves into the next guy for Jacksonville, Keelan Cole. He played really well this weekend. He played on 66% of the snaps. He had 5 targets for 5 receptions, 47 yards, 1 touchdown. He ended up with 15.7 fantasy points. He's pretty much available everywhere. 0.1% of ESPN leagues and less than 1% in Yahoo leagues. So he's definitely somebody you could add for speculative, kind of like Shenault is, and see how he turns out. Like I said, Westbrook not playing could be a factor for both these guys as well. They both go against Tennessee this weekend, so it's a decent matchup with Tennessee's defensive backs kind of being banged up as well. Next one I got is Mike Williams. He started the season with a shoulder injury, sprained AC joint. We didn't think he was going to play going into week 1, but he actually played 78% of the snaps. He actually looked pretty good. He had 9 targets for 4 receptions, 69 yards, 10.9 fantasy points. He's owned in about 48% of ESPN leagues, 45% of Yahoo leagues. So it's kind of 50-50 shot to see if he's out there in your league, but he definitely has the upside to be worth a bench spot, and hopefully his shoulder is healing and he can make a difference going forward. Keenan Allen didn't look very great in this game. Tyrod Taylor wasn't that good either, but he preferred throwing to Mike Williams at least, so that is a positive sign for him. Next one I got is Anthony Miller. I've been very high on Anthony Miller going into this season. He had a pretty good day. He got kind of bailed out at the end by the touchdown here. So he had 6 targets for 4 receptions, 76 yards, 1 touchdown. He had 17.6 fantasy points. He's only owned in about 41% of ESPN leagues, 56% of Yahoo leagues. So it's kind of like a 50-50 shot, kind of like Mike Williams if he's out there in your league. The one concern for me is that he only played 42% of snaps. I think this is crazy because he's obviously their second best wide receiver, and Nagy's just not putting him on the field enough, and that's a concern for me. So he's somebody I do like. I would pick up, but I'm probably not going to start right away just because that snap count. It's very scary to me, especially since he's getting out-snapped by Ted Ginn, and then they're putting Darnell Mooney and Javon Weems on the field like 30-some% of the time. It's just too much. Next one was Alan Lazard, Green Bay Packers. He played on 88% of the snaps, so that's definitely something very reassuring. So it looks like he's the wide receiver number 2. Marquez Valdez-Scantling also had a nice game, but he had a couple drops as well. They got Lazard in for 1 carry for 19 yards, then he caught all of his targets, all 4 of them, for 76 yards and 1 touchdown. Ended up with 18.2 fantasy points. He's owned in 27% of ESPN leagues and 43% of Yahoo leagues. So there's a chance he's out there. He's definitely a guy you can pick up. They played Detroit this weekend, so he's somebody you could plug and play in your lineup if you need to. Otherwise, you can always stash him on your bench. Next guy is one of my personal favorites, kind of like Joshua Kelley. He's been a guy that I've been high on for a while now, rookie Bryan Edwards. He didn't have the greatest first game. He did play 75% of the snaps, so that is very reassuring. He had 1 target for 1 reception, 9 yards. Kind of a little wide receiver screen. Looked pretty good there. 1.9 fantasy points. He's available in most ESPN and Yahoo leagues. A lot of people might be dropping him after week 1 because he didn't quite produce. So maybe after your waiver wires run, if he gets dropped, you can pick him up. I do like that he played a lot. He's a very, very good wide receiver. He's very talented. Derek Carr spoke very highly of him. If Henry Ruggs' injury turns into something, he could definitely be somebody to watch out for. It seemed like they just were trying to set up plays for Ruggs and Waller a lot early on, and that kind of hurt Edwards. And he was open on a couple plays as well that he just didn't get the ball. So he's definitely somebody to put on your bench and keep a lookout for going into the future. Next one, Scotty Miller. He played on 61% of the snaps, primarily in the slot for Tampa Bay. He had 1 carry for 6 yards. He caught 5 of his 6 targets for 73 yards. Out of all the wide receivers, he might have shown the best rapport with Tom Brady. And Tom Brady does like throwing in a slot, so he's definitely somebody interesting to me. If you're in a PPR format, he's definitely somebody you want to pick up, stick on the end of your bench, and just see how he plays the next game or two. Because if he gets that rapport with Tom Brady, this could be Brady's favorite target by the end of the year. He had almost 13 fantasy points this week. He's only owned in about 6% of leagues in both Yahoo and ESPN. So there's a good chance he's out there in your league as well. Definitely worth taking a shot on, especially if you're in a PPR, half-point PPR league. And they go against Carolina this week. So if you really needed to plug him in, he probably wouldn't be the worst player in the world to plug in. Next one we got was Corey Davis. He played last night. I don't got his snap count. They haven't updated. They haven't released all of that yet. And he caught 7 of his 8 targets for 101 yards last night. He looked pretty good. He could be this year's Devontae Parker, that kind of 4th, 5th year wide receiver that hasn't done much and then all of a sudden breaks out of nowhere. He's got the talent. It's just always been health and, mainly health with him. And then he had about 17 fantasy points. He's only owned at about 5% of leagues, so there's a good chance he's out there. If you want to pick him up, grab him, stick him on the end of your bench, see what he does for the next couple of weeks. Wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. He does go against Jacksonville this weekend, so it's a decent matchup depending on who's covering him. The rookie C.J. Henderson did look good this last weekend, and if he's on A.J. Brown, it could open up some more opportunities for Corey Davis. Next one we got was Russell Gage. He is an Atlanta wide receiver. He actually played on 70% of snaps. That was kind of surprising. He's their 3rd wide receiver. They were in a negative game script all game, so that might have helped his snap count a little bit. Matt Ryan did throw the ball 54 times. So Gage did get 12 targets. He caught 9 of them for 114 yards. So he was very productive. He was very productive when he did catch the ball. He's shown pretty good rapport with Matt Ryan. He ended up with 20.4 fantasy points. And he's only owned in 4% of ESPN leagues and 2% of Yahoo leagues. So in a PPR league, he's definitely worth picking up and seeing how he does going forward. He goes against Dallas this weekend. And he looked like that guy in the middle of the field more than Hayden Hurst in this matchup. So it'll be interesting to see how that progresses going forward at least. Then one of my favorite sleepers for this year. He didn't do much this weekend. He's kind of like Bryan Edwards in this case. It's John Ross for the Bengals. He played on 84% of the snaps, so he was in there a ton. He had 5 targets for 2 receptions and 17 yards. Not a great day. 3.7 fantasy points. The thing I will say, though, is Joe Burrow was under constant pressure all day with that Chargers defensive front. They got a great pass rush with Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram and all the other guys they got there. So Burrow didn't have a lot of time to throw the ball. Ross is more of a deep play threat, so he needs a little bit of time to set up and throw. But I think if Burrow gets time to throw the ball, John Ross could have a big day. They go against Cleveland this weekend. If Cleveland is without Greedy Williams again, Denzel Ward's probably going to be on A.J. Green, so John Ross could hit a big play deep. He's not somebody I wouldn't recommend starting him this weekend, but he's somebody to definitely stash on the end of your bench and see how he does the next couple of weeks. Like it says on the screen, he's only owned in 2 and 3% of leagues, so there's a very, very good chance he's out there in your league. And somebody to put on the end of your bench that could have a lot of upside, he's definitely worth it. And then I think we're getting over to the tight ends. So this one was kind of surprising to me. Dallas Goedert. And actually, I think that's a typo over there. He played all but 4 snaps for the Eagles this weekend. And he caught 8 out of his 9 targets for 101 yards and 1 touchdown. He was one of the best tight ends, if not the best tight end in week 1. He had 24.1 fantasy points. He's only owned in 27% of ESPN leagues. This is kind of crazy. So, if you're in an ESPN league, go out there, look, and see if he's out there because he's definitely worth picking up at this point, especially with all the other pass catchers in Philadelphia that aren't really doing much. And then he's owned in 56% of Yahoo leagues. So it's kind of like 50-50s out there in Yahoo. But definitely if you're in ESPN, if you're in Yahoo, go out there and see if he's there because he's a very, very talented tight end. I know Ertz is there as well, but Ertz played every snap and Goddard played all but 4 snaps. So they're both on the field. They're both going to get targets. Next one was Logan Thomas. He's the tight end for the Washington football team. He hasn't done much in his career, honestly, but he was the starting tight end for them. He played 74% of the snaps. Good snap rate there. He had 8 targets. That's a great target rate for a tight end. He caught 4 of them. Not the greatest catch rate, but he has Dwayne Haskins throwing him the ball. He had 37 yards, 1 touchdown. So a pretty solid day overall. He had 13.7 fantasy points. He's pretty much available everywhere. So if you need a tight end, if you need somebody to stream at tight end, he's definitely somebody worth checking out. He goes against Arizona. Arizona was pretty bad versus the tight ends last year. They did all right versus Kittle this past weekend, but Kittle sprained his knee, so you got to take that with a grain of salt too. Thomas is probably their second receiving option after Terry McLaurin, so he's definitely somebody to look out for. He could be a sleeper. Next one's O.J. Howard. Obviously, he's on Tampa Bay. They have Gronk. Gronk played like 75% of the snaps. Howard played 53% of the snaps. So, not crazy there. Gronk didn't look too productive, though. Howard had 6 targets, 4 receptions, 36 yards, 1 touchdown where he was wide open in the back of the end zone, 13.6 fantasy points. He's not somebody I want to go out and start, but if you have a spot on the end of your bench, he's definitely worth a look. He's only owned about 5% of ESPN leagues and 18% of Yahoo leagues. So he's definitely somebody that's got a lot of upside, especially if something would happen to Gronk. Next tight end we got was C.J. Uzomah, who's the Bengals tight end. He's kind of been a backup tight end most of his career, or splitting time with Tyler Eifert. He looked pretty good on the field, actually. Playing 72% of the snaps. He had 5 targets, 4 receptions for 45 yards, 8.5 fantasy points. Nothing too great, but if you're real desperate for a tight end, you could probably do worse. And he showed decent rapport with Burrow, so there is some upside there. Probably a guy you want to stash on your bench more so than start this week. He's going against the Browns this weekend, which is a decent matchup for the tight end. So I wouldn't be surprised if he has a decent game. Maybe if you're in a DFS this weekend, we'll see how much he is. He could be a decent play in DFS as well. I believe the last tight end we got is Jonnu Smith. He played last night, so we don't have his snap count numbers. He was in the game a lot. They tried to involve him pretty well. He had 7 targets for 4 receptions, 36 yards, 1 touchdown. He ended up with 13.6 fantasy points. I was surprised that he's only owned in 22% of ESPN leagues. That is very, very low. Definitely a guy you want to add, especially if you're lacking for tight end. And he's super athletic. They want to get him involved. And he looks good with the ball in his hands. He's definitely a threat after the catch. He's just somebody you really want on your team. And he goes against Jacksonville this weekend too. Jacksonville's not great against the tight end either, so it's definitely a positive matchup. Then defenses to consider for week 2. For most of my waiver wires, I tried to focus on guys that were owned in less than 50% of leagues, but these were some defenses that I did see that were available in some leagues. So New Orleans, they were good against Tampa. They're owned in about 66% of ESPN leagues. So a third of leagues, they're out there still. Yahoo, they're owned in pretty much 4 out of 5 leagues. But if they're out there, they're definitely somebody worth considering. They play against Vegas this weekend, so it should be a pretty good matchup. Tampa Bay is a defense that I love a lot. Todd Bowles, their defensive coordinator, is one of the best in the business. Their defense actually did pretty good against the Saints, all things considered. They're available in 57% of ESPN leagues and 75% of Yahoo leagues. They go up against Carolina this weekend, which would be a great matchup. Definitely worth streaming this weekend. Then Tennessee is only owned in 22% of ESPN leagues and 51% of Yahoo leagues. They've been getting some hype since they picked up Clowney. They do go against Jacksonville this weekend, so it should be a decent matchup. But this is the order of the defenses that I'm looking at for good matchups this weekend. Arizona's another one. They look decent against the 49ers, minus the one big play to Raheem Mostert. They're only owned in 1% of ESPN leagues, 4% of Yahoo leagues. They go against the Washington football team this week, who doesn't have a great offense. So it could be a game for Arizona's defense to really put up some points or at least do well. The other one I did consider was Washington. They do have that great defensive line. You saw it last weekend against Philadelphia. They go against Arizona. Arizona's offensive line isn't the greatest. So they could get a good amount of sacks on Kyler Murray. But the one thing to consider is Kyler Murray is really good at scrambling away as well. This is pretty much all my waivers for the week. Pretty much all the notable ones that were out there. Let me know what you guys thought about this video. I tried to put a lot of information into this, especially with the snap counts, how guys did last week, who they're playing this weekend, their ownership percentage in both ESPN and Yahoo. If you don't play on ESPN or Yahoo, you can still check out the ownership percentage in your league, whether it's Sleeper, my football or my fantasy football league, NFL.com, any of those. But just let me know what you guys thought of this. I'll be doing a waiver show or a waiver episode pretty much every week. And with that being said, let me know down in the comments some of your favorite waiver wire guys for this weekend. Who are guys that you're picking up? Who are guys that you're dropping? How did your team do in week 1? Anything like that. We're going to be doing a lot of talking about football this week. I'm going to be also putting out an article that I'm writing up. It's going to be my takeaways from week 1, like 1 or 2 things about each team that had really stood out to me or that I noticed while watching all of the games. When I do have that article out, I'll be sure to leave a link down below. And with that being said, that's pretty much all I got for this video. If you guys liked and enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do so. It helps build the community that we are trying to build here at Coach Craig Sports. If you are a new or current subscriber who hasn't already done so, hit that notification bell. It'll let you know every single time that I put up a new video. We're going to be doing lots and lots of content, waiver wires, looking at weekly matchups, looking at DFS. It's going to be an exciting football season for 2020 and especially for fantasy football. But with that being said, that is all I got for this video. Hope you guys all enjoyed and have a great rest of your day.